Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about the adventure of our soul. Through timelines, through eons, this existence, perhaps many decades ago, what about a few centuries? Where have our ancestors been? What is their life about? How do we correlate story throughout the eons? What is this all about? Our soul is an eternal being. We've been through many lifetimes as humans on this earth, and as we shall say, maybe potentially other planets, but today we're focusing on Earth. What we're also talking about is, what are the hardships, the way in which we've lived, the way in which society was presenting itself at that time, and how can we see that we truly were all looking for the very same thing, regardless of what was showing up. Today, my guest is C. Michael Prater. His book is The Indentured, and what I wrote on the front of the page was, how did we get there? Trials of the soul, through embers of the heart, and shackles of the human drama. Regardless of the ages, we are all on a soul journey. His book, The Indentured, is a novel which really takes us through a century in time. How they lived, what their heart was about, what their questions of life was about, and how they pursued to be able to say this life is worth it. How can we reflect on those stories to see how they correlate to ours today? Perhaps we need a refresh. Maybe we need to wake up, because in the year 2023, it's not about how many things we could put on our legacy and our obituary when we're done. It's not about climbing the ladder of success. It's about who we are. What is our heart about? Are we open enough? Have we touched enough souls? Have we truly come here in our mission of service and fulfilled the orders that we were given? Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us to talk about your new book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So glad to have you. Michael, you know, just as I shared in the beginning, I think sometimes when we read novels, we say, oh, but that's all a fantasy. It's a story. It's a movie timeline. Don't you think perhaps maybe many people, but most of my listeners already know, this lifetime is a movie channel and perhaps a story. Yes?
Well, yeah, you have a lot of that that goes on because, let's put it this way, I tell a lot of people where I'm from originally. I grew up in southern Ohio, and as I grew up in southern Ohio, who would have ever thought that I would have left the confines of a rural environment to be able to, pretty much go across the world, and primarily in Europe and in Africa and places like that. And all of those adventures made me to the person that I am today.
Wow. Yeah. And also, too, don't you think that as we have those adventures, we're not only physical adventures on the earth, but also we're learning about the culture, about where they've been before, what they've done, and how we've gotten ourselves to today?
Absolutely. No, because, again, who we are today, it did not happen overnight. It took a long period of time for us to be able to become the people that we are today.
Yeah. And your book, Indentured, I had to look up, let's define indentured. Can you share what your thoughts are about the word?
Oh, absolutely. The word indentured, as it is written in the book, was a determination to find out how people came to America. Quite literally, the word means to enslave or to sell oneself for a period of time into a servitude. When you take a look at the materials that we see within the indentured servant, and, case in point, many, many years ago, when I was all the way back in the 5th grade of school, I remember that I read a story about the indentured servant or a person who was an indentured servant. Mm-hmm. I had no clue why that intrigued me because, until the internet came available to where we could do more research and have information quicker in our hands, there had to be a greater reason why that intrigued me. Well, it wasn't until many years later that I found out that my own ancestor, Thomas Prater, came to the place called Elizabeth City, Virginia in 1622, and he came as an indentured servant, which in many cases they would have to spend about 5 years in servitude, 5 to 7 years, depending on the type of trade they were able to have. And then they, as a reward, they would have 50 acres of land, and they would also be given $50 to get started with their new life on this planet.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you. So right there in the beginning, they were given land. When we think about, when my ancestors came over in the 1900s, they were given nothing. They came over as they were fleeing poverty in Polish and Lithuania and Ireland, and they came over with zip. And they tried to be able to find jobs, and the jobs were, very difficult. And when we think about they had to learn new trades, many of them had to give up everything that they knew before. And what they did is they all worked in the mines. They shoveled, coal. Mm-hmm. And when we think about that, we say, how has the human society and the stories in the different centuries and the different years, I always liken it back to, eons ago there were philosophers, and boy, they really knew so much more than now, And then you look at the cowboys and Indians that came along after that, and they couldn't even find their head from their butt in the hole in the place, I mean, like they were very, 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 very simple, very limited in their life,
Right.
And then along came yours, and they were actually given land when they had a trade, and then we kind of dropped down again, where they came over with nothing, and then they had to just shovel dirt or coal, So it's almost as if immigrants had this up and down flow. There were time periods where they came and it was a benefit. There, or there's time periods when they came when it was not a benefit that we could see. Do you know what I mean? It was a benefit to get away from the poverty and everything, but it wasn't a benefit when you landed. You weren't like, you weren't greeted or anything. I can remember, my grandparents, we were Irish, and everybody would make jokes about the Irish in Pennsylvania at that time, and it was terrible. I can distinctly remember, and being of Polish also. Hey, Polish was even lower on the totem pole. So I think there's many times along human history where immigrants have gone, as I said, up and down, up and down, up and down in their choices of immigration. Do you think, perhaps?
I think so because, more to the point, when I was under the tutelage of my mother and my father, my dad used to give me wonderful stories about his service time in Germany. And, of course, in Germany, the time that he was there, which would have been the early 50s, while the Korean War or the conflict was going on, he was actually a medic in Germany, the 10 cities of Germany. And I listened to all of his stories, and he of course, told me a few German words, and I thought that was fantastic to be able to learn that. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to go to England and then later on to Germany and visit different places that I began to get a taste of what my family's actually had to escape from.
Right.
And like you just said, my mother comes from an Irish background. And of interest, I've not really done as much research as my cousin has on the Irish side of the family, but the reality is that they came, they were looked down upon. One thing that a lot of people don't see is, like in New York, they always had the drunk Irish policeman, with the big rounded belly and the red nose and things of this nature. You also had, let's even go back to Germany when there was the Holocaust that came about. Because, once again, the pictures that they depicted of the Jewish people, whether they were the right pictures or not, that's what infuriated, that's what alarmed the people, about even the Jews that were upon America, in Europe. But the reality is that the prejudice that people had coming from one country into a land that offered many opportunities, there was still a lot of evil that occurred. But here's what you just made. You made a wonderful statement in this respect. The Irish began to look for things that they could do. If you go back and you look at the railroads, for instance, it was the Irish that learned how to lay railroad track. It was the Irish that learned how to do Morse code. Case in point, my grandfather on my mother's side, again, William McGuire, he had taught himself how to type, and he taught himself also how to do Morse code and to use the interpretation thereof, so that he could get a job with the railroad at the Louisa Switch in Kentucky. He taught himself these things to make that self-improvement so that he could be more than something of ease. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What I think is really important is that we have to remember that humans are open in their mind beings, in some, again, that ebb and flow throughout society. So what that would mean is, like, I can distinctly remember my grandfather. He was in the mines, and he says, I'm done with this. I'm done with it. And then he went to work at a mental health hospital to be an orderly with the patients there. That is a vast difference. He decided in his mind that he wanted to care for people that couldn't care for themselves. And I will distinctly remember, the mockery in the family. How dare you do that? You're going to go work with crazy people and blah, blah, blah. You're up at the nut house and all this other stuff. So at that time, mental health was really not a good place. It was, people were being locked up because they didn't act like everybody else thought. So if you look at it, he was at the forefront of teaching ancestors that would come behind him, which was me to be a doctor, my daughter to be a doctor, my son to be another thing in healthcare, our family to all be nurses or whatever. So, in other words, he was showing them, you don't have to shovel that. I'm going to do this first, and then you see it trickle down. Don't you think that if we look at history or our ancestral lineage, you could take a little piece or a little fragment of someone's hope, their story of hope, or their story of their dream, or their story of they dabbled in this or that, and look at how that thread played out in generations onward?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, well, just take it just for a moment. Just take a little snapshot in time. My parents grew up during the Depression. In fact, my mother was born, my mother and father were both born in the 30s, early 30s. They were too young to really partake in World War II, but those that came through the Depression, those that were born earlier so that they could grow up in the Depression era, were the same ones that fought World War II. They made it all happen. But here's the thing that I find interesting. They allowed their experiences to mark who we are. And so I'm a product of my father. I'm hardworking. Yes, I've retired 2 or 3 times. I've lost count. But the reality is retirement is just, as you and I discussed earlier, it's just a figment. It's just a period of time. It's just something that's happened. But the reality is that you can still retire, just don't retire from life.
Right.
And there's still that learning experience. I love what you stated about your grandparents that said, hey, I'm tired of, digging out coal. I'm tired of doing, all the remedial jobs. I'm going to go in this direction, which has allowed you to become a doctor, your siblings to become a doctor, your families to become something other than that they were trained to be. Interestingly enough, my father quit school when he was in the 9th grade. I understand he got his GED later. Then he became a medic, then he was in the military, but there was so much. He became an electrician. He became an orator, if you will. He was highly educated in other ways. He loved to read the Bible, and he expressed that to me as well. There were so many things that my father taught me that I became a product of who I am because of who he was. And that holds true with my brothers, that holds true with my sister, that holds true with all of my family. So I still have a great love for all of the family that's still living, my aunts that are still living on my mother's side, all of my father's family, his sisters and brothers have already passed, but I remember, the challenges, the opportunities, and they etched out a way in these Americas for me to be the person that I am. And that's probably why, it's like this. When I wrote the book, The Indentured, I drew not only upon the experiences of history, I drew upon my own experiences. And, my own experiences such as I love to dabble in metalworks. I love to build. I love to do different things. In fact, what I do right now is I help rebuild houses, and it's fun. To me, it's frustrating when things don't work, but I'm able to step back in the history a little bit to see how they made things happen, and it livens up the writer that is inside of me to be able to put down into words things that will maybe make us think a little bit. I think one of the great travesties is kids walking around with cell phones. Kids having, instead of learning their skilled trades, they're being sent in front of TV and learning how a cartoon works.
Right.
But they've never learned how to be working men and women to make changes in their lives. And you're the same way. I mean, we're both similar in age, and we grew up similar in our context. But the reality is that we never saw our ancestors with a cell phone in their hands.
Yeah.
We saw them with pick and shovels. We saw them with books. And it's really a sad commentary that we don't have more of what we need, physically speaking, to make us what we should be today.
You know what I think also, too, and I think this is vitally important, for anyone that is awakened, that knows that they're on their soul journey, they know that they had a mission, they know that they're in service, just as I had shared with you before the show, just as I know I've always been, we are, quote, in service. I think it's highly important to understand we are the teachers. And once you understand that you're a teacher, then your life takes a different shift. I have several grandchildren, and they would always say, Grandma, he's copying, he's this, he's that. Grandma, he's took this, he did that, I said, stop. I said, what are you doing? And they said, and they keep going on. I said, you are the teacher of your brother or sister. Oh, but they're copying me. No, they're not copying you. They are learning from you because you are the teacher. And so the oldest one is the teacher of one down. The next one is the teacher of the next one down, and so forth. And I walk around and I taught them that lingo so that they can change their perception going forward, because they already have a mission, and I already know what they were. Like when the kids were born, you give them a name. I didn't give them a name. One is determination, one's magic, and one's wisdom. I don't know what their other name is. That's the name I gave them, Right. And because what's happening is I think we've not done that with children, is to tell them that they are now the teacher of someone below. A child can teach an elder person compassion. A child right now in the year 2023 can teach an elder just to be a little bit free and not worry about things. A child can teach them, I love you no matter what. It doesn't matter what you look like, what you smell like, what you're doing. Doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So I think to attune to the fact that everyone is a teacher of someone else, and that person in turn is a teacher of someone else. If we would turn that around and do that, we would see how our ancestors over all of these centuries had been teachers, yet they didn't even know that they were in missions, that they had a mission, that they were in service, and that they were the teachers. But now we are realizing it, and now it's our turn to let everyone know that they're a teacher for someone else. Perhaps.
That's a good point. Let me ask you: did you like school when you were growing up?
I don't even remember. Probably not.
Probably not.
I have 4 degrees, so it's like, well, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Well, the reason I asked that question is that I had mixed emotions about school. I enjoyed education, but I just feel like there was more to school than there should have been more to school than there was. Mm-hmm. But what's funny is when we would have snow days or whatever, and we got bored out of our skulls, the first thing we wanted to do was set up a makeshift classroom in our own homes, things like that. And so when you were speaking of being teachers, it takes me back to the one-room schoolhouse. And you had multiple grades that were assigned. And what was interesting, the oldest student, who was probably, let's say, in the 10th grade, they were required to help the teacher by passing on their knowledge to the 9th grader, which passed the knowledge to the 8th grader, which passed the knowledge, all the way down the line. Right. We don't see that as much today, because the fact is that we're expecting the teachers to do it all. Mm-hmm. And we're setting up teachers to be failures. Mm-hmm. And I can say that from the aspect of being a college associate professor, and I helped teach pre-engineering when I was at the Somerset Community and Technical College in Somerset, Kentucky. And what I loved about it is being able to educate the students who they didn't see a sense in life. They didn't see a purpose in what was going on. And when you could give them a purpose or a direction, they came alive in my classroom. And a lot of times my assignments seemed rather obscure, but I would give them an assignment on the board that would say, this is what I want you to do. Now go back to the lab and make it happen. And a lot of teachers might look at that and say, why are you doing that? Well, if you leave it wide open enough, you allow the creative juices to really engage, and it brings us into a greater knowledge. I myself, it's like this. I'm not the best writer in the world. I don't pretend to be. I learn from reading other people's writings. I read and I learn from what others incorporated in their thoughts. And so because of those things that I'm learning from them, I'm becoming a better person. One of the things that I enjoy, for instance, like if I want to read a romantic novel, I'll read Nicholas Sparks. If I never wanted to read Louis L'Amour because I grew up in the Midwest, and I'm thinking, why would I want to know anything about the West? And yet one of the funny things that occurred when I became a pastor in California, I thought, well, I might as well read about Louis L'Amour. And the first book I picked up was called well, anyway, I can't remember the storyline, but it began in Old England. And Louis L'Amour was wise enough to carry that, the Saka series. And he was interested enough to be able to carry that on into the American coastline. And, at first it became Old England, I would say probably, and the American coastline, and then eventually the moving towards the west. But isn't it sad that we deprive ourselves because we don't allow our minds to look beyond where we have been or what we know, and we don't allow ourselves to expand into other genres of learning?
Right, but I also think, too, the definition of the word teacher is follow me. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. Teacher is supposed to be, I will present my observations, and now you can create what you can get from that observation. That is the best teacher ever. I was teaching the kids how to do a painting the other day, and they're like, what does that ballerina have at the end of her hand? And I said, I don't know. So we picked up the paintbrush with white paint, and we made these little dots on the top end of her hand, and they actually turned out like hearts. And they said, well, what's that? I said, that's her magic. She's just letting out. She's creating. And they said, oh, okay. And then they were able to understand something differently. And then they went on to change their own picture. So I think sometimes the idea of teacher, nowadays, we look at the year 2023, society wants everyone to fit within this validation, this limitation. We see it with social media. How many likes because you are within this certain, little standard deviation everything needs to live inside of. Anything outside of that is a problem, So you see it with teaching also. You've got to get these grades, fill in all these little black circles, stay within that standard deviation to, quote, be a success or be this or be that or whatever. But yet I think our ancestors a long time ago, when they didn't have those limitations, they were able to be more creative, to be more expansive, and to learn other professions and other jobs. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. They were tired of their the restricted life that they were given. That was one of the things that I learned about the main character that I have in the book. His initial name was called John Derryman, and the last name many times reflected who the person was. So if you were if your last name was Thatcher, then most likely your parents or your dad was a roofer. If your name was Taylor, most likely your dad was a tailor. Smith could have been woodsmith, could have been silversmith, could have been goldsmith, depending on the middle or that front prefix could have said a lot about the individual. But the sad part is they were limited to what they were allowed to do because it was basically grandfather passed on to father, father passed on to son, son would pass on to the grandson, so on and so forth. The beautiful thing is when one man would have the gumption to say, I want to give you a better opportunity to do something more with your life. And then the thing with John Derryman, and of course I'm not going to, if you want to know more, read the book. The reality is that he was allowed to expand into a realm that allowed him to became, but not because it was easy for him, or that it was without criticism, but because his own father said, this is the way you should go. This is the way that you should pursue yourself. And that's the same thing. I've tried never to interfere with my own children. They had to make their own decisions which way they wanted to go. And I think they've been able to do it quite successfully. And for that reason, I'm thankful for the children that I have, and I pray that the Lord will continue to bless.
Right. But let's also, too, talk about ancestors or even present-day family or friends or teachers or whatever, and even over the eons. Those that did not have, quote, what we quantify as success, as, this is, you quote, you've made it kind of idea or whatever, or have a life that you can reflect back on and say, isn't it wonderful and all that other stuff. I think sometimes we tend to negate or to forget that they learned something. They taught us something. They showed us pain. They showed us suffering. They showed us strife. They showed us death. They showed us poverty. They showed us all of these hardships. And those are just as important as a house, kids, and education, straight teeth, or whatever. You know what I mean? So,
I do.
And when in actuality, they didn't sell their soul, so to speak. They just gave up on their spirit for a little while to follow their soul because they were truly finding what they were made out of, I can experience the darkness. I can know what pain is all about. I mean, even in my life, my goodness, if I ever told the story and all of its truth, man, people would go running, And they're like, well, whatever, and I've even had people that in my life that I didn't tell my story to, and they're like, oh, well, she was just a blonde. She was just this, that, and the other. She had such a good life. And I'm going, honey, you have no clue. You know what I mean? And that was like
right.
30 years ago. So I think that what we share, that with what we teach, is so much more important than the perception of squawk, squawk, squawk to be able to judge. So can we perhaps look back at our ancestors and say, irregardless of their path, it was awesome because we're here today?
Yeah, I think so. Well, not only that, but, do we embrace the opportunities that come our way?
Mm-hmm.
I've had the opportunities that have, to be an engineer, had the opportunity to be an electronics technician. I learned electrical not only from my dad, but another electrician from back in the day. I needed, because of the pastorate, I was also looking for a job when the Somerset Community College position opened up to allow me to teach what I had already learned. And I think that many times we don't allow new opportunities to come our way. Case in point, when I resigned the pastorate that I was pastoring in California, I ended up moving back with my son to Colorado Springs. And the only job I could find was with a company called Xerox, a little rinky-dink company. You might have heard of them. And they were number one in call center operations. Well, I remember I went and marched into the manager's office. I said, I want to be a manager for your company. And 30 days later, my numbers were so good that they said, we got to keep a watch on this guy. I was already in my 50s. And I went from never having managed a call center to becoming a supervisor in a call center, weekend manager, if you will, on the call center. And I found out that I had a niche for it and that I loved it because I got to love on people. When we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to explore and to become something that, or we may even think it beneath us, we lose out tremendously. We really, really do. And I don't care what it is, whether you're a servant at a Cracker Barrel, serving
right.
their dinner, or working in the country store, which I've done myself, or being an automotive mechanic. How many people can really fix their own cars, especially today with all the technology that's involved? What I'm saying is, more than anything, is that if an opportunity presents itself, take it.
Yeah.
You'll be amazed what you'll learn from it. It may not be the best paying job in the world, but you'll stash away thoughts and memories and education, which might lead to something better down the road.
Wow. And also, too, in your book, in The Indentured, I think it's very important to also understand that the character was doing something with their hands. They were doing something that they believed that might make life better, might make it pretty, being as a blacksmith could be like make, something that easier for others in life. However, their goal was to put their love and compassion and feelings into their work. I mean, that's what our ancestors really should have been teaching us. Some did, some didn't. I look back at my own. I was a dental hygienist for 25 years, and people had so many comments. It was unbelievable. And then I looked back and reflected on it, and I pretty much had like over 500,000 patients that I worked on. And I looked back and I said, it was not about the job. It had nothing to do with the job. Every patient that I put back in the chair, I looked into their eyes. That was my sole mission. I was to connect soul to soul with every single person. And I did it. And I was in service. So I think sometimes when, in your character, when they were giving a gift or they were doing something or making it with love or that or the other, it was truly transmitting energy of, I cared about this when I made it. It was for you. And that's what we want to know, is that in your life, whatever you're doing, a car person, fixing your car, you think they're just fixing your car? No, they see that you have a little girl, and they made sure that those tires were strapped on straight. They made sure that I'll go check all of your fluids for you because I know you can't. Or maybe I'll deliver it to your house if you're an elderly person. You don't need to come out because it's raining today. So I think, is not the lessons that we are teaching over the generations more of compassion, hope, grace, and love? Those four things. But we're just doing within a profession, within a job, within whatever we're doing day to day. But we're really all, and just as your ancestors did, hundreds of years ago, they're still looking for those four things. It's just that they're doing it through a different line of service?
Yeah, I think so. Because the fact is that what's the old adage? No man is an island. And I'm a man. Let's like this is that I can actually look at myself and say, "Woe is me." Who loves me? Who cares about me? But if I want to get out of that, all I have to do is just walk downtown. All I have to do is just be with other people, go to a restaurant or whatever. I spent a little time in the hospital recently, and I found out something that's very reciprocal, and that is if you treat the nurses well, they're going to treat you just as well. If you have a smile on your face even when you're feeling bad, I guarantee you that you're going to say, "We know you don't feel well, but we appreciate your smile." And I've had even nurses talk to me that way, and I'm going, wow, they get it. They do get it.
Yeah. I think in closing, too, Michael, your book, I wrote on the front page, I wrote, life is hope, breath is hope, and love is life. So I think that I think your character very much had this baseline. This was the thread that I felt throughout your entire novel, because it really talked about that in a very deep level, but yet still took us through a novel on a journey that we wouldn't even recognize that you were really talking about the human spirit. And, to say, wow, that's the human spirit. And people really want to gravitate towards that, but you can find it in anyone, anything, anytime, if you just start awakening up to it. So really, your book, The Indentured, is really a soul journey awakening book. It's just in a different eon, perhaps?
I like that, yeah. Because the fact is that the old adage is the one thing that men do not learn from history is that they never learn from history. And, historically speaking, there's a lot of movement, a lot of advantages, but I don't want to be stuck just in the past, but I want to learn from the past so I can be more effective today.
Right. Well, people always think they're learning from the past because, I don't want to go over the edge of that cliff, so now we're going to learn how to bungee jump. And it's like, no, you're learning that there are limitations, but you're also learning you can still find ways to be free. Two different sides of that same coin, but the answer is find the other side. For whatever story you're in life, flip the story. Step back out of being the participant and be the observer. Once you're the observer, it's like, whoa, what's playing out? That's a different story. And can I see something on a deeper meaning? That's what we want to get out of a novel. Yes?
I like that. I do. I think you're right on point.
Yeah. Michael, it was such a great time talking to you today about our concepts
You
of,
too.
I think the idea of ancestral lineage, of families, of what we're learning, being teachers, and the story of the human spirit, because so many times people are saying, I'm getting these things and they're hitting me over the head and I don't really understand it. When you read a novel like yours, it comes almost by osmosis, so to speak, You are getting it. And it kind of so it's an inspired journey of your ancestors and the stories, and that's what we wanted to read, this year in 2023. So we thank you for sharing the book.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the book as well.
Can you share with us how to find out more information about your work?
Sure. There's a number of cases. One of the things you can do is actually, the book is available through almost every venue, through Amazon, through Barnes & Noble, Target, you name it. It's Christian bookstores. They actually have it as well. And because we kept it, it was actually published by Westbow Press originally. And since then, it's been by great writers, has also picked it up, and they're trying to make it ever so lively for me as well. But more than that, if you're interested, you can also go to the website, which is cmichaelprater.com. And if you go to cmichaelprater.com, you get to read a little bit about myself, get a little excerpt from the book. There's also a Kirkus review, which we published, which is actually published through Amazon, or Amazon has posted it, so you can see the Kirkus review. For those people that don't know about Kirkus, it's one of the best ways to find out what they think of your book is, and they will turn around and add to that as well, in any storyline. But if there's more interest, they're also free to email me. I don't know if I can put my email out there.
Don't put your email; it gets spammed like crazy.
I got you. So, but if they go to the website, there's also access to the email as well.
Very good. Well, Michael, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. We thank you so much for sharing your inspiration and letting us know how we can all be teachers and just enjoy the world we're in. So we thank you.
And thank you for the time. I appreciate it so very much.
If you'd like to find out more information about C. Michael Prater, again, the book is The Indentured. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to his website for more information. And it is about stepping up, stepping out, and saying, I want to be an observer. I want to look back in reflection at my ancestors and my life around me, my day to day, and see exactly how I'm living my life, what is the story we have all been questing for, and what is the really core values that will really delight my heart and bring me back into service to be able to help and support others. That's really why we are all here. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family. clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit dr-jeanette-gallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.